Hei, jeg heter Iffit Qureshi, og jeg kommer til å ta dette foredrag på engelsk, since we've got some English speakers here, so you don't have to get exhausted by listening to Norwegian. So the topic I'll be talking about is embracing diversity, but I'll also be talking about my own personal story. And I think it's important to maybe underline that this is my minority experience. It's not the minority experience. I would say that we all have different experiences, as Nina has said, that me, her, and Omar are very different from each other. And I will show exactly how that affects us in some way or other. And also affects my PowerPoint. So anyway, so this is the perfect family. And this is the kind of family that we mostly are exposed to in the media, whether it's in Norway or whether it's abroad. And this is the kind of family that I also thought I had as well, but the fact was that it was far from the truth. This was our family, and this here, this little girl here, that's me, and that's my sisters, no sons, and that's my father and mother. And my mother had one more child in her stomach, so there was one more little one that destroyed my life, who was going to come along. And so there was like 7 of us, 7 children, mother and father living in a 2-apartment, 2-bedroom house. And I remember sleeping in the kitchen with my mother, with my other 3 siblings in a bed. And we would share the blankets, we would share our towels, we would share practically everything in our lives. And for me, that was the norm. We were speaking Punjabi at home, we were speaking English at home. I felt completely normal. There was nothing that was different for me. I felt that I belonged, and I had an enormous amount of self-confidence. And of course, like, there would be times when I'd visit my father in his shop with my mother, and we would sometimes hear somebody making some kind of comment. Not that I really understood, but when I'd be sitting there eating my crisps at the age of 4, and suddenly the atmosphere would change, I later realized what it was. It would be because somebody would come into the shop and say something like, "You bloody packy." And my father's reaction would change, my mother's reaction would change, and I didn't understand what was going on. But at such a young age, you're very wary of the atmosphere, of the feelings, and you're not able to put into words what you experience. All I knew was that everybody was in a bad mood. And eventually, when I started school at the age of 5, I was told that we were going to have a nativity play, where we were going to play Jesus and Mary. And I remember saying to the teacher, can I be Mary? And my teacher told me, no, there weren't any brown people in the time of Jesus. So everyone looked like this. And instead of actually being allowed to participate in the nativity play, even to help people with their costumes, I was told to leave the classroom. Yeah. So, I mean, you can imagine how that affects you at a very young age. And if it had been me, if it had been your child, how would you actually react, you know? But this was actually like the whole system in itself, the school system as well, was involved in excluding people of minority background. And I think that it came to a point where I didn't really know who I was, because suddenly I was at a clash with these identities. There was this identity at home, which I was completely accepted, and then there was this identity at school which told me that I was the other and I was not belonging. And there was times where, yes, I got my hair pulled by my teacher, I got beaten up by kids at school because of the fact that I was a different colour. And I think that I can identify very much with this little girl. This is an experiment that was done in the 1940s, which people have done repeatedly over the years, and even to this day. I think this experiment here is from last year, where this little girl is asked about some dolls, and if I can get that, and it's not working. Just 1 second. Just 1 second. Okay, let's try and find the shortest one so it doesn't go on and on. Entretenido. Okay, let's try this one here, which is very different from the one that I've got. So this test here was done in the 1940s, and it's been repeated again.
In Brown versus Board of Education, the famous case that desegregated schools in the 1950s, Dr. Kenneth Clark conducted a doll test with black children. He asked them to choose between a black doll and a white doll. In most instances, the majority of the children preferred the white doll.
Right, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to spin this forward, okay? So then you don't have to see the whole thing, but...
And can you show me the doll that looks bad? Okay.
I think I'll have to put that back just a little bit.
And can you give... And why does that... And...
Sorry,
the doll
it's not my
that
fault.
looks bad.
Okay, right.
He's white. And can you show me the doll that looks bad? Okay. And can you give... And why does that look bad?
Because it's black.
And why do you think that's a nice doll?
Because she's white.
And can you give me the doll that looks like you? "15 out of the 21 children preferred the white doll."
And I mean, it is pretty powerful stuff, and when you're exposed to it at a very young age, and you don't have the language to explain your experience, to describe it to people that even have the time. You came from a very poor family. Family was always busy doing other things. I think that what you end up doing is internalizing that pain or the image that other people have of you. And in fact, carries on and it stays with you for many years to come. And I think that that's where, when I eventually managed to leave Scotland, or manage it made it sound like I was running away. Well, I think you would too in the 1980s. But anyway, I moved to, oh, there you go. Well, I came to a country called Norway where they don't use the letter Q, which is my name starts with the letter Q. So I was doomed anyway, so I just went from one place to another where I was definitely not going to be accepted. And I must say that it was constantly like, how do you spell your name? And, oh, well, that's a very strange name. It was constantly being underlined that my name was strange, that I was strange. You come from Scotland. Actually, did I mention that I come from Scotland? No, okay, talk about anomalies. That I come from Scotland, born and brought up there, families from Pakistan. But I moved to Norway, and you try and explain that to people. They say, no, you don't come from Norway. No, you don't come from Scotland. That's not possible. Why is that? Because they've got red hair and freckles. Okay, right. So when I moved to Norway, that's more or less where it looked like. A lot of people were wearing these awful mohair sweaters. It was basically, everything was what they call in Norwegian blenda hvit. And Michael Jackson was not Michael Jackson, he was Mikael Jackson. And I was wondering, what is wrong with these people? Why are they destroying everybody's names? But at the same time, I was experiencing that people were mocking me for my background. And I remember it was pretty tough growing, when I came here, I was about 19 years old. I was doing some jobs. I was working in an old folks' home, helping people cleaning. And there was times where I'd be sitting on my own. I was, again, the other. I was not included as part of the team of the staff. So the Norwegian staff would be sitting on their own, and I would be excluded from all conversations. And at a point, you just come to a point where you just end up living in your own cocoon. It's the same cocoon that you created for yourself in your childhood, you end up creating for yourself later on as well. And the kind of things I was exposed to, so now you're not just exposed to stuff in the workplace and at school and outside, but also in the newspapers as well, where foreigners can't be bothered to learn Norwegian, and foreigners are lazy, and foreigners don't integrate themselves. And then suddenly, of course, I learned to speak Norwegian, and everybody feared me terribly. And so then I was constantly in search for my individuality. Where am I? I mean, among all these stories about the gangs that Omar was talking about, and I'm probably your father's generation, the gangs that were taking over Norway and creating havoc, the Pakistani gangs and the taxi drivers that weren't paying the taxes, but nobody ever mentioned the Norwegian taxi drivers that the Pakistani taxi drivers had learned to not pay their taxes from. So in the middle of all this, I thought, like, so where am I in the middle of all of this? What can I do to try and find a space for myself, but not just for me, but also other ethnic minorities that were struggling as well and who were tired of being labelled. But at the same time, I saw that people were silenced. There wasn't any room to talk about racism and discrimination. So what did I do? I just decided to take things into my own hands, and I started the first Norwegian minority magazine called Fusion. Okay, it turned into Confusion, but we don't talk about that. That was 1995, and the heading is, "In the future we will be deciding," or "I framtida bestemmer vi." Little did I know that I was completely wrong. We're still not there yet. But here I had this magazine which the dream was that ethnic minorities for the first time would be able to define themselves. No longer would they be placed in little boxes. They could now create news that was important for them. And the first news that we brought out was about ethnic minorities being bullied by the police. And it was a horrific stories that we came out with, but those stories were sidelined. It wasn't so important. What was important was that I had come out with this magazine with very little experience, and I was actually hounded by the media. So instead of actually looking at this as something positive, it was completely flipped on its head. And people were actually jealous about the fact that a little invandraravis had received 360,000 kroner in support. And many years later, I applied for a job at the University of Oslo, 2003, and this is after the 11th of September attacks. And at the University of Oslo, I applied for a job. And they asked me, and the job was to work with ethnic minorities and try and promote more minorities to the university, not that they have a problem with that now. And they were asking me questions like, "Are you Muslim? How would you react if somebody ate halal meat in front of you, non-halal meat in front of you?" And I was looking at them, and I had my credentials from the university, I'd studied there, I had all my years of experience, I had, you know, why would they be asking about me being Muslim or eating halal meat? Anyway, let's not go into that. But anyway, that was enough to start a fury, and I decided that I would ruffle some feathers eventually. So this is basically what I did in the media to a lot of people when I started writing my Norwegian articles about racism, discrimination, about honour killings, etc. What is honour killings and what's not? And I ended up on the front cover of newspapers and on TV. I was in certain debates, and I was undermined time and time again. But once you give me a microphone, I wouldn't stop, because I had a message, and I knew that there weren't very many people out there that were doing that. And I meant that I was like very good at communicating with people, and as you can tell, I was brilliant at it. So basically, I would ignore my opponents. I would look down upon them. Now, you talk about let's go down. I wouldn't go down. I would drag them up to my level. But then, after years of this and writing newspapers, of course it gets to you, you get exhausted. And then, 22nd of July 2011, the terrorist attacks happened in Oslo and Utøya. And that had a profound effect on me. And I remember wondering, what is it that I want to do to try and, you know, make a positive contribution to this country and to the city that I love so much? And I just stopped writing completely. And what I started doing was taking pictures of people in the streets. Just random people, absolutely anybody at all. And in the beginning, I just took pictures of people that looked like me, or maybe a mother with a child, or an elderly couple, but never anybody like her. But when I did stop her, I was quite amazed, and I suddenly realized I've had my head up my ass for too long. Basically, I have been living in this bubble believing that my way was right, and I knew the answers to everything, when in fact, I didn't. And it was then my art, I call it art, and it's quite difficult to say that, because for a long time I didn't realize I was an artist. For many years I didn't realize that I was a photojournalist. And then I started taking pictures of people of all backgrounds, and I'd taken up to 2,000 pictures in Oslo of people in Norway, or people in Oslo. And I came out with the page Humans of Oslo, which is inspired by Humans of New York, which has today over 40,000 fans and over 150,000 visitors per week, which is absolutely brilliant. I mean, the power that page has. I could start my own political party at this stage. And, you know, one of the interesting things was that when I had my first exhibition, it was quite touching. I didn't realize that that would actually be possible. And when I was asked to do an exhibition, I thought my pictures weren't worth anything. But they were, and I ended up having 7 exhibitions altogether. And eventually the book, the Humans of Oslo book, which I have here, which is the very first Oslo street photography book. And the interesting thing is, when people see this book and they see my name, they ask me, is this an integration project? It's not an integration project. It's a project about our city, which is actually necessary for each and every single one of us to be able to understand who we're supposed to be targeting, who we're supposed to be reaching out to. And it's got some of the most touching stories. I was told by my editor that he'd never cried so much and laughed so much while editing a book. And this is with my name, Iffit Qureshi, with the Q that nobody ever uses is actually on the front cover of a book. But unfortunately, I'm still labelled as the invandrer, as a foreigner. People ask me, is it an invandrerroman? Hell no, it's not. And I remember, I've been asked to hold a lot of talks, mostly about minority issues, and then the Rogaland Theatre called me and asked, would you come and hold a talk about how we can create change and how we can prepare for change? And they had heard my TED talk that I had done in 2013. And I was amazed, because that was the first time somebody actually saw that I had something to contribute which wasn't just about minority issues. It was actually about mainstream things like, inspiration, about how to change the way that you think. And I use my experience from Humans of Oslo and my life experience to inspire other people. I think that I'd have to add that the person who's actually made this possible is from Interkulturell Museum, when I had my first exhibition. And this is Daniela, and she is Dutch. And my experience is that the people who actually have helped me to move forward have been people of minority background, either visible or non-visible, or they've had intercultural, multicultural background, they've lived abroad, and they have a wider perspective. And seriously, if it hadn't been for her, I would never have had the exhibition at the Interkulturell Museum or Oslo Museum. And I'm extremely grateful to her for the help that she's given me, and also the other people who have got minority background who told Hildendal, there's a person out there who can create a book which is the first of its kind in Oslo. So I think that I would have to say to people is that when it comes to minority issues, be aware of your own thought process, and not just that, but also all diversity. It's not just an ethnic minority issue, it's people of visible minorities with, in wheelchairs, it can be people who are blind, etc. It's really important to watch your own thought. Ask yourself, how would I react if that had been my child? How would I have reacted if that had been my neighbour or my mother? Because at the end of the day, we're all human. That's what we are. We're all humans of Oslo. Okay, thank you.